Hello fellow sim racers. Last weekend I received this PlayStation Classic as a birthday gift from my brother-in-law. Look how tiny it is. Anyway, being the sort of person he is, he's loaded it up with lots of old racing titles that I played during my childhood. So I thought it would be a great idea to slip on the nostalgia goggles and see how some of those games still hold up. So, first up is Ridge Racer Type 4, which I guess is a bit of an odd choice, but I didn't want to front load the video with Gran Turismo. I got my PlayStation in 1996, though my memory is a bit sketchy about that sort of thing these days. I remember buying Ridge Racer Type 4 and being truly disappointed with the way that it handled. This came out after Gran Turismo, and honestly, there's no comparing them, at least in terms of the driving experience. What has stood up really well is the gameplay though. This is a lot more fun than I remember it, despite some pretty sketchy car behaviour. They do seem to slide, seemingly at random sometimes, but you can counter-steer and it does feel like you can catch all the slides. Strangely enough, it all actually feels very intuitive, even on a D-pad. And that's something that should be noted about the PlayStation Classic. While you can use USB controllers and support is pretty good, especially if you install third-party emulators on it, very few of the games actually support the use of analog sticks from what I can tell. Of course, your mileage may vary. Finally, I can't move on to the next title before referencing the soundtrack, which is peak mid-90s, and hopefully not going to get me a copyright strike. Buckle up and sit tight indeed, because the next game I'm playing is Destruction Derby. Now this is a title that's held up surprisingly well. The gameplay side of things is fantastic, and the driving model is, well, it isn't terrible. Sure, controlling the cars can be a bit of a challenge because, well, you're using a D-pad, but generally the car does what you'd expect it to. It understeers on the power and the rear slides mostly where you'd expect it to. As far as mid-90s arcade driving games go, there are so much worse out there. But this is a title that's all about the fun factor, and I think it's fair to say that the current interest in Wreckfest owes a lot to this game. Like all the games on the PlayStation Classic, it's running at 720p, which I must admit does look very messy when upscaled on a modern 2K or 4K monitor. That being said, these games were originally intended for the PAL or NTSC standards, so 720p is already a pretty significant upscaling to begin with. And when you consider that, 720p isn't all that bad. Next up is a Mega Drive title simply called F1. This isn't included on the PlayStation Classic, and if you want to try it, which you really don't, you'll have to go down the emulator route. The best thing about this game is this pixel art image of Martin Brundle. I say it's the best part because, well, the driving experience is poor. From a title from 1994, this is awful in that regard, especially compared to the excellent Jeff Crammond title and Papyrus's IndyCar Racing, both of which beat this game to market. On the plus side, it is a fully licensed title for the 1993 F1 season, and it features all the household names, Senna, Prost, Hill, Schumacher, etc., as well as all of the teams you know and love. As you can see from the footage of Interlagos, the circuits do at least bear a passing resemblance to their real-world counterparts, though they are littered with hundreds of anachronistic trackside objects, which I presume are there as obstacles to compensate for the lack of any real gameplay or driving experience. This is very poor. This is Micro Machines, otherwise known as falling off of a table simulator. This is another title that you'll have to emulate if you want to play on the PS Classic. And honestly, there's not too much to say about Micro Machines other than it's just as fun and just as infinitely frustrating as it used to be. Your vision of the road ahead is non-existent. When you crash into other cars or objects, it has consequences that are non-Newtonian in nature, and as ever, you fall off the table every 4.5 seconds. Still, it is sort of brilliant. Finally, onto the daddy. It's easy to forget just how much of an impact Gran Turismo had when it first launched in 1997, But playing it alongside other titles from the preceding couple of years brings a few things into stark contrast. First of all, and most striking for me, is that this is the first of the games I played here that made any effort to make the cars sound, well, not terrible. Next up, there is just a real sense of space and 3-dimension. This is the only title in the video where I really felt that I could race in close quarters with other cars. But really, above all, it's the driving experience that sets Gran Turismo apart from other console titles of the age. Sure, by today's standards, it would be considered an arcade title, but it's easy to forget just how terrible the driving experience was in most of the real arcade titles of the era. I'm tempted to make a more comprehensive video looking back at the first Gran Turismo game, because there's so much depth to it compared to all the other titles we've talked about. And honestly, a bit of footage of me being outpaced in an MX-5, while very much on brand, doesn't begin to scratch the surface. Sony, in their infinite wisdom, decided not to include Gran Turismo on the PlayStation Classic, but as you know, where there's a will, there's a way. So that about wraps things up here. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, it would be great if you could hit the like button and subscribe to the channel so you can see more content like this in the future. So all that's left to say is goodbye, thanks for watching, and enjoy the rest of your day.